Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you're listening to this edition of Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world of sports, left sports media, a weekly news hour highlighting the intersections of sports, politics, and radical activism. We are available for broadcast by Pacifica Radio member network stations, college and community radio stations, and low-power FM stations, as many already are. If you can't listen live, we are also available via audio podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and through the Google Play Store. Audio streams of our podcast are also available at our site, nasradicalsports.com. To contact the show, you can use our contact page on nasradicalsports.com, at nasradiosports on Twitter and Instagram, and Not Another Sports Show on Facebook, or just use the NASRadio hashtag. We were on the disabled list for the first week of November 2017, but we are back with a fully stacked show to catch up on all the news and information of the last 2 weeks. First, we want to thank Aly Raisman, Brianna Stewart, Hope Solo, and Michaela Maroney, as well as the other athletes who have joined the Me Too movement, the movement that started online and social media talking about sexual harassment, sexual assault, and sexual abuse, and people sharing their stories. We've seen a huge amount of stories being shared, a huge amount of statements being shared by prominent members of a number of different industries and a number of different people. And the sports world, of course, is being seen in this as well, with Michaela Maroney and Aly Raisman talking about the abuse they received at the hands of Larry Nassar, allegedly during his time as one of the doctors for USA Gymnastics. Brianna Stewart wrote a piece for the Players Tribune about it, and just before we went to air, U.S. national team for the women, Hope Solo, has alleged sexual misconduct at Sepp Blatter, the former head of FIFA. And so we do want to thank them for their courage and their courageousness to share those stories publicly and to put their names out there publicly and to discuss the trauma that they've faced, to hopefully make it so other people don't have to face that trauma in the future. We also want to send some props to Ben Stokes, who is a cricketer. And Ben Stokes was arrested in late September, and he was eventually released without charge, but he has been suspended from the cricketing team on England's Ashes, that he has been suspended until further notice. And about a month later, at the end of October, news came out that Ben Stokes, the cricketer, the reason he was arrested was that he had caused bodily harm to a 27-year-old man. Well, two men, Kai Berry and Bill O'Connell, came forward and said, actually, Ben Stokes, to them, is a hero because he was defending them from a man who was hurling homophobic abuse at the couple. That Berry and O'Connell said that this man was hurling homophobic abuse and was not stopping, and they felt threatened. And Ben Stokes stepped in and stopped the guy from continuing to abuse these two people. And so big props to Ben Stokes for that. And also props to Graham Kashia, the soccer player from the nation of Georgia, who joined his team in the Netherlands wearing a rainbow armband and has continued to wear his rainbow armband despite a bunch of people in his home country going absolutely apoplectic about it and now wanting him kicked off their national team. So we had a lot of players taking actions and taking some brave statements and taking some brave actions that we really want to thank and applaud here at the start of the show. And we have got a whole lot to talk about in the sports world and the political world this week, and we're going to get right into it with the NFL. The last time we were on, we talked about the Houston Texans and their owner, the Trump-supporting Bob McNair, saying that, quote, we can't have the inmates running the prison, close quote, in talking about the players having the ability to protest during the national anthem. And after that was very rightly panned, very rightly criticized, and just raked over the coals in every major media outlet, every small media outlet, of just how unjustifiable this statement was, Bob McNair has come forward with another explanation. Quote, I was not referring to our players when I made a very regretful comment during the owners' meetings. I was referring to the relationship between the league office and team owners and how they've been making significant strategic decisions affecting our league without adequate input from leadership over the last few years. I am truly sorry to the players for how this has impacted them from the perceptions that it has created, which could not be further from the truth. Our focus going forward, personally and as an organization, will be towards making meaningful progress towards the social issues that mean so much to our players and our community. Well, here's the problem with this. Come on. We know you were talking about the players. It's really obvious and really clear that you were talking about the players. You were talking about the move of industries that we've seen in all sorts of businesses, football. It's just owners in general of any major business, management in general in any major business. The move of capital to get mad that employees can have any kind of power. And that's what this was. This was a move to get mad at the employees for having any kind of agency, any kind of rights, and any kind of power. And that giving up any kind of that agency or that power to the employees is, as he put it, the inmates running the prison. That how dare the workers think that they could possibly run the industry. And as we mentioned on previous shows, no one tunes in to watch Roger Goodell. No one tunes in to a football game to watch Bob McNair sit in a skybox. No one's tuning in for that. We're tuning in to watch the players play. We're tuning in to watch the athletics happen. That's what we're tuning in to watch. And the players really run this system. The players really run this system, and they're in a very precarious situation where they don't have guaranteed contracts in the NFL. And so we're in a system where it's really clear he was talking about the players having any kind of agency and any kind of power and wanting to put a stop to that. Taking this argument and going to where Bob McNair wants it to go, it makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. Is he talking then about the league office and team owners? That the league office is the inmates running the prison? That doesn't make any sense. That dog doesn't hunt. It makes no sense at all for that argument to come forward. And I can certainly see these apologies because he wants players to keep playing for his team. He wants free agents to possibly come to his team. He wants to be able to draft players and keep them on the team and try to make a mea culpa to the star players that he's got that he's having a very obviously rocky relationship with right now. And the move is one that is not very surprising here. He's an arch Trump supporter. He is an arch Donald Trump supporter. He had meetings with his players during the Obama era when Obama got elected, talking about how he was sad that Barack Obama got elected. This is a guy who is very, very conservative, very, very much politically right-wing. And so when he said that we can't have the inmates running the prison, it was abundantly clear that, of course, it had the racial components, as we've talked about, but it had the power dynamics components of being mad that employees would have any kind of agency and any kind of power and any kind of ability to start saying something. And the week after he made these statements and he started apologizing and he apologized again and he continued apologizing, almost the entire team took a knee during the national anthem as a rebuke. That they do have agency, that they do have power, and they're going to have this agency and they're going to have this power whether Bob McNair likes it or not. Whether Bob McNair thinks it's okay or not, these players can use their constitutionally protected rights and the rights that they have in the workplace. That whether Bob McNair likes it or not, or Donald Trump likes it or not, these players have the ability to take a knee during the national anthem and to use their legal rights on the job and to advocate for policies that they want on the job. We also have Colin Kaepernick news. With Halloween coming, I was really shocked that we only had one story, just one story making national news about a guy in blackface doing a Colin Kaepernick costume. I honestly, given the nadir of the political era that we're in, would have honestly thought we might have seen more. But we did see the news story come out about the University of Nevada, Reno police officer who wore a Colin Kaepernick outfit with a fake big nose and a, quote, "will stand for food" sign. Chief Adam Garcia said, quote, "For those who have seen the Halloween costume of one of our officers apparently mocking a citizen who has chosen to take advantage of his constitutional right to protest, I offer my sincere apologies. Members of our profession are held to a higher standard, and denigrating another on or off duty is insensitive for its lack of respect and lack of understanding on how others may negatively view their actions and may be impacted. Behavior such as this magnifies unsafe feelings and lack of trust in police, especially when that individual is responsible for the safeties of all members of the university, regardless of color, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or religion. At a time when officers should be heightened in their attentiveness to perception by our community, this act seems extremely out of touch with those sentiments and reflects poorly on all of us." Close quote. But it does fit in. It does fit in perfectly with the mantra of state authority going after people who are protesting. Look to the Kennesaw State case where the cheerleaders were protesting, and we had state officials and local sheriffs coming down on the cheerleaders for daring to use their constitutional rights and trying to punish them. That this is something we've seen where the state uses its power and uses its authority to go after the protesters rather than the police who are engaged in this sort of conduct. We had the St. Louis police who were marching through the streets parodying the protester slogans of "whose streets are streets," because nothing says having respect for law and order like them mocking people who are out protesting the fact that one of theirs killed an unarmed person. And it sets this whole system set up, as Chief Garcia mentions, it sets up a system where it magnifies these feelings of distrust of the police. When we see these sort of things happen, that they're so offended that someone dared to take a knee, or they're so offended that someone dared to criticize their institution, that they're going to behave in fashion of sharing ridiculously racist internet memes, or in this case, dressing up and mocking a private citizen. That we've got this system that's set up in such a way that when he says they're held to a higher standard, I'm wondering where? Where are you held to a higher standard? The officer who shot and killed Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old kid in Cleveland, wasn't held to a higher standard. You had people arguing that it was okay for him to shoot a child within 2 seconds and that he shouldn't have been playing with toy guns. Or you could take myriad cases of in New York with Eric Gardner of being choked to death on video. On video. Talking about, well, he shouldn't have been selling illegal cigarettes then. That, where is this higher standard? Where is this higher standard? From the videotaped evidence that we have, and people are saying, guess what? We don't care. They're still not guilty. To states not even indicting, not even going through the case of even a cursory indictment of an officer, let alone being found guilty in a court of law. Where is this higher standard? Where is this higher standard actually at? Because we can certainly say ethically they should be held to a higher standard, but right now as it stands, private citizens and their behavior is scrutinized and put under a microscope and being forced to engage in conduct that would be incredibly shocking for anyone who doesn't have the training to do. But the person who's armed with a gun, the person who's gone through the training, can engage in all sorts of behavior and engage in all sorts of conduct, and we're going to give them the deference and the benefit of the doubt no matter how many unarmed people are killed and gunned down, or how many people are murdered by the state. That we expect private citizens to behave more professionally than we do some of our own police. That's a frightening statement. That's a frightening thing. And certainly, this case is one where we've got this scenario set up, and this is a perfect analog for it. That we have this system set up, we have this scenario set up about state authority and state power. And the fact is that this officer is also not going to be punished. He was just reprimanded publicly. What about the higher standard? What about that higher standard? The Houston Texans lost their quarterback to a torn ACL. And Tony Dungy on NFL programming said, quote, "Sign Colin Kaepernick. You don't have good quarterback play. When you have a mobile quarterback, your offense looks different. There is a mobile quarterback out there to get." Rodney Harrison, former player, said, quote, "I agree with you. As a player, I would lose all respect for my coaches and my organization if there was a guy out there that actually started a Super Bowl that is better than the guy we have. How do you have confidence in your coach? How can you trust that your coach is trying to sell the system that he's trying to sell when he's not doing everything in his power to win football games?" Close quote. And yes, this is the same conservative, right-wing, politically minded Tony Dungy, the guy who said that gay players would be distractions. Yes, that Tony Dungy has even gone in now and said that Colin Kaepernick is not going to be a distraction, that Colin Kaepernick deserves to play. Yes, that Tony Dungy. And it's a weird moment where I'm agreeing with Tony Dungy. It happens a few different times when he was talking about the level of forgiveness and allowing Mike Vick back into the league, that I was agreeing with Tony Dungy. We don't agree on a whole lot, but in certain instances, he's right. And this is one of those instances where he is absolutely correct. And of course, to the surprise of absolutely nobody, the Houston Texans instead decided to sign Josh Johnson. And I could come in here every week on the broadcast and I could bring up the fact that there are subpar quarterbacks and subpar quarterback play and really, really terrible quarterbacks being paid by the league and being given starting jobs, being given backup jobs, while Colin Kaepernick is still sitting at home. And I could come in and I could start talking about all the just horrific mess of these quarterbacks being brought in and how teams are continuing to sign them and continuing to sign them and continuing to sign them when Colin Kaepernick's still not being signed. And it highlights just how bad this gentleman's agreement is, apparently, to not bring in Colin Kaepernick. That it really feels like the old gentleman's agreement. That there's no necessarily official rule, but that the owners have decided they don't want to bring him in. Because the Houston Texans have signed Josh Johnson. He is a quarterback who has not played a game since 2013. They signed a quarterback who has not played an NFL game for 4 years. He is also a quarterback who has not thrown an NFL pass since 2011. They've signed a quarterback to come play for them that has not thrown a pass in 6 years. They have signed a quarterback who has not thrown a pass in 6 years. And all three of the quarterbacks on the Texans have a lower quarterback rating than Colin Kaepernick. And let's not forget that Colin Kaepernick played with a really, really terrible line. Colin Kaepernick played with receivers that were number 2 in the league in dropped passes in that last season with the Niners. He still has a higher quarterback rating than all of these guys. Just imagine if they gave the best opportunity to put a winner out on the field. Just imagine if they allowed that to happen. The Miami Dolphins and their owner Stephen Ross have announced a new fund to address social justice issues, with money going to groups, quote, involved in community engagement, education, or justice reform, close quote, scholarships for students who are involved in those same projects, sponsoring the Police Athletic League of North Miami, and expanding the Ross Initiative in Sports for Equality program to talk about, quote, racism, prejudice, diversity, and inclusivity, close quote, among high school students. So they also noted that they're going to have an annual town hall meeting, quote, featuring community leaders, law enforcement, and educators with a shared goal of improving race relations and bringing people together under the unifying values of sports, close quote. This effort and this fund to start addressing social justice issues in the local community and start addressing these social problems in the community and finding meaningful ways to address them is the next step of some of these symbolic protests. That what started as the symbolic protest during the anthem, that these issues needed to start being addressed, that these issues needed to start being taken care of, and needed people to pay attention to them, is now progressing to the next step. And Stephen Ross wasn't necessarily going to engage in this kind of expansion or engage in this kind of program being much larger than he originally visioned necessarily by himself. It was the protests of the players. It was the support given by allies and fans that pushed this forward. That power gives up nothing without demands. And this was a demand in the symbolic protest. And is this going to be a catch-all? Is this going to be a panacea? Is this going to be a complete fix? Obviously, no. But it's a very good next step. It's a very positive next step. Meanwhile, we have news about the Dallas Cowboys and Ezekiel Elliott. Ezekiel Elliott has now been re-suspended, and his 6-week suspension will start. It's been an ongoing saga, a legal mess where he's been suspended, then unsuspended, then suspended, then unsuspended. And now he has been re-suspended. So he is suspended, and his 6-week suspension is going to start. Jerry Jones has been now in a big campaign against Commissioner Roger Goodell for his suspending of Elliott, seeing that there was no evidence to suspend Ezekiel Elliott for his allegations of domestic violence, that there is no legal basis for him to punish Ezekiel Elliott, and that this is a, quote, overcorrection, close quote, and not really what the NFL thinks about issues of domestic violence, but they're trying to be seen as doing the right thing. And Jerry Jones is very much going all in on this case because Jerry Jones is now getting older. He's getting older, and this is going to be a possibility for his team to win a Super Bowl. And he very much could lose out on that. He very much could lose out on that Super Bowl with Ezekiel Elliott, the running back, having to sit. And so this is largely an effort that I feel is motivated by that. It's largely felt like it's motivated by that this is a personal affront to Jerry Jones. This is a personal attack to Jerry Jones. And so he's going after Roger Goodell for it, and he is throwing every possible thing out there, saying that the NFL doesn't really care about the domestic violence issues, that this is an overcorrection because of how they handled the Ray Rice case back when they gave him a 2-game suspension. And this really feels like Jerry Jones is just going after Roger Goodell in every possible way. You know, recently we saw him going after players for their constitutionally protected right to take a knee during the anthem. And Jerry Jones saying that any player that, decided that he was going to take a knee or quote-unquote disrespect the flag was going to be punished by the team, possibly cut by the team. That we've saw those sorts of instances. Yet the fans who are, throwing things and yelling racist abuse at players who are taking a knee, Jerry Jones doesn't seem to bat an eyelash at. Jerry Jones also, of course, doesn't seem to think that the rise in his team's profitability, the rise in his team's valuations, and overall net worth having increased over the term of Roger Goodell's tenure as commissioner being connected at all. That this is really just an attack at Raj, because he's mad at Raj for saying that players have constitutional rights. He's mad at Raj for saying that he's not going to punish players for utilizing their constitutional rights. And so when that didn't go through, we saw Papa John Schnatter, the owner of Papa John's Pizza, coming forward and making statements where Papa John is blaming the NFL's protests on their declining pizza profits. He's blaming the NFL and their protests for declining pizza profits. No, I think subpar pizza is part to blame for your declining pizza profits. I think the fact that you're not treating the workers incredibly well is a reason for your declining pizza profits. I think people taking the time and cooking for themselves is part of the decline of your pizza profits. That's what I think it is. And we can't necessarily say there's a causation of Papa John Schnatter coming out and making these statements, but we can say there's a correlation, and there is a very real concern that Jerry Jones might have pressed Papa John into making this statement during the recent quarterly profit call for the NFL, because Jerry Jones owns over 100 Papa John's franchises in Texas. And so there is a connection there, and one wonders if Jerry Jones pressed Papa John into making this statement and talking about how sponsors may be wanting to duck out on the NFL for players using their constitutional rights. Because apparently Papa John is more concerned about players protesting than he is about the reasons that they're protesting. Jerry Jones is now even threatening to sue Roger Goodell over his contract extension, all because his star running back is suspended for 6 games. And it says something frightening about the policy beliefs and the priorities of Jerry Jones based on his actions. It really feels like he's prioritizing winning a Super Bowl over allegations of domestic violence, over people's constitutional rights, that what Jerry Jones wants and what Jerry Jones wants to get is more important than everything else. And this is a system where it feels really skeevy to me. It feels really weird and squiggy to me to have to defend Roger Goodell in this slight instance. This is one of those narrow corner case scenarios where I actually have to come in here and start defending Roger Goodell and start saying that Roger Goodell is absolutely right in this suspension and the legal fight going forward that Ezekiel Elliott is going to be spending these 6 games. We'll, of course, be keeping an eye on this as it goes. Well, we also have some news to catch up with in the NBA. In NBA news, after the most recent mass shooting in Texas at the church, Steve Kerr, the head coach of the Golden State Warriors, issued a public statement saying, quote, "To solve it, I think we almost have to look at it like a public health issue. Too often we get caught up in political rhetoric, Second Amendment rights, NRA stuff. We have to look at this as having nothing to do with partisanship, political parties. It's got to be a public safety issue, a public health issue." I'd read a great article today that talked about comparing this to the automobile industry. Apparently in the 1950s, about 9 or 10 times more people died in auto wrecks than die right now. What changed over 70 years? Safety measures, right? Speed limits, auto regulations, seatbelts, car seats, driver's license registration, and making sure people deserve to drive. All of these things are safety issues, and I think we somehow get our government to cut through all the crap and get right to the point of fact, which is safety, which means a lot of things we can do without taking away people's Second Amendment rights. Let's do the sensible thing, but our government has to lead the way, and they can't just cave into the NRA just because they want to make money. But they have to put people's safety and health over the interests of the gun lobby and the gun industry. Doesn't seem like it would be that far of a stretch, but for whatever reason, we're paralyzed and unable to do anything to protect our citizens. It's disgusting, and it's a shame. And I'm not out here as one of the more liberal people who decides that gun control is magically going to solve the problem. That simply limiting the amounts of guns is going to solve the problem, because the NRA, you can go back and look at its past, where the NRA was actually in favor of gun control. The NRA was once actually in favor of gun control. Of course, the time period that I'm talking about is the late 1960s in California, where the NRA was very much in favor of gun control because the Black Panthers were out walking with their legally to have publicly displayed guns. And the NRA went apoplectic about that and supported the Republicans in California to pass legislation that was going to limit gun rights. That gun control and you can go back and look in its very expansive history, you can go back and look in the extensive history of gun control, that gun control has racist dynamics behind it. It has racist impacts to it. That gun control in its history can be incredibly, incredibly problematic and racist. That's not just a magic fix of how the policy gets implemented. That we can certainly have Second Amendment rights. We can certainly have people owning guns in the country without having major significant problems. But a simplistic solution is one that we really need to take a closer look at. It's one that we really need to be aware of and start looking at the history and the impacts of past practices and past policy that is very similar to some of the ideas that are being put forward today. That we really need to start looking at those, because who's getting disarmed, what the policies are, and the history of those policies is something that certainly needs to be looked at. You're listening to Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world sports, Left Sports Media. We have just been discussing the protests in the NFL, the reactionary pushback, and some recent positive developments coming due to the protests. We also talked about Steve Kerr's recent statement about gun control and gun policy after yet another mass shooting here in the United States. Coming up on Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world sports, Left Sports Media, we will be analyzing a host of college sports news, talking about the NCAA being a horrific institution that needs to be smashed already, as well as a foray into some other sports news. So let's get straight into it with unpaid college sports news. Buena Vista University, the small university, had their president of the university telling players and cheerleaders that they must stand for the anthem. As a private institution, the players and the cheerleaders there must stand for the anthem. Well, when sophomore Alyssa Parker, a member of the cheer team, was told that she would have to stand for the anthem and would not have the choice and would not be allowed the ability to protest, she instead quit the cheer team. The president noted that it was their kneeling that brought attention to the school and increased the tensions at the school. The president of the university blamed the cheerleaders and players who took a knee during the anthem for bringing bad attention to the school and increasing tensions at the university. Nope, it's not the whole police shooting unarmed people thing that's bringing negative attention and causing the tensions. Nope, it's not the complete impunity that those officers have to shoot unarmed people and then never get indicted, let alone arrested or charged for it or even found guilty. Nope, it's not that at all. Nope, people are getting mad about taking a knee. And this is the frightening, this is the disturbing, this is the unfortunate thing that currently we have in our political reality, where white people's feelings, and I say this as a white person, white people's feelings have priority over the lives and experiences of people of color. That we're more worried about white people's feelings and how we're going to feel seeing an athlete take a knee than we are the reasons behind their taking a knee in the first place. The reasons behind them taking a knee in the first place are ignored. The reasons behind the systemic racism, the systemic misogyny, the systemic white supremacy, those things are ignored and not wanting to be talked about because they're indefensible systems to even try to defend. That we're more worried about how white people are going to feel. We're more worried about how white people are going to feel than we are about the real issues behind it. And it reminds me of a time back when I was in college at the University of Illinois, that during Black History Month at the University of Illinois, a group of RAs in the residence halls had decided that they wanted to talk about Black History Month and how people were still alive during the Jim Crow era, and how these realities of what the change has been. And so they talked with the university leadership, they started talking with some of the students, and symbolically they started putting up not only a lot of informational posters explaining why they were doing what they're doing, informational displays about the history of the civil rights movement, and pretty expansive ones about the history of the civil rights movement, but they also started putting up some of the signs that would have been present in earlier eras, like the whites only sign. And obviously they told us we didn't have to follow them, but it was just symbolically that these things used to be up, and there were people at the like on campus, professors and stuff, obviously, people in your own families that may have been alive when those things were the norm, when those things were socially acceptable to have up, and to start burgeoning into these conversations that the RAs were going to hold about the issue and how we can continue to fight racism and white supremacy, since it's no longer as completely overt as a sign, dictating who can use a certain water fountain. Obviously, racism, white supremacy, these issues are still there. And they're still fairly clear if you can see them, but they're not as opaque and just very much crystallized as obvious as they were in prior eras. That we still have these issues very obviously, and it's making those cases of why these policies are there. But a lot of this ended up being having conversations about how white people's feelings got mad, that a group of white people living in the residence halls got mad, that these signs made them feel racist. And that says a lot more about them, that if a sign made them feel racist, that says a whole lot about them. And so they were pulling down these signs. They were drawing all over the informational posters, putting up pictures of hand-drawn pictures of phalluses on pictures of Dr. King and Rosa Parks, because they were feeling racist, and they're not being racist. They're, pushing back against the supposed ideas of racism by doing this. And, of course, ironically, being infinitely more racist. That we push this idea that white people's feelings are somehow more important than the actual lives and experiences of people of color. When the University of Illinois got rid of Chief Flip-a-Lot, quote unquote, Chief Illiniwek, the white guy who is dressing up in a faux native outfit and running around on the field, we were more worried about white people's feelings than we were the experiences of native students on campus and the experiences they had. We were more worried about white people's feelings than we were about the actual people who are being represented. And that's a problem that we have with a number of these instances when it comes to the sports world and these political protests. Well, jumping from one indefensible thing to another, the NCAA had their Knight Commission public opinion polls released, where 79% say that big universities put money ahead of student athletes. 69% say that big universities are part of the problem and not the solution to problems in college sports. And that 51% believe the NCAA is part of the problem and not part of the solution to college sports. Which makes me wonder, who are the 21% who think that universities aren't putting money ahead of college athletes? Who are these 21%? Did they talk to basically every AD and every coach that in these major schools? Who is this 21%? Who is this 1/5 of the public that somehow thinks universities aren't putting money ahead of student athletes? Who are the 31% that think that universities are, not part of the problem? Who thinks this universities are not part of the problem here? And who's the 49% that thinks the NCAA is kind of like Ralph Wiggum standing in the hallway? I'm helping. Who thinks the NCAA is helping? Who can look at the track record of the NCAA and say that they are really helping? Who can look at the past history of the NCAA and say that they're helping? Head of the NCAA, Mark Emmert, said that the NCAA is, quote, the worst possible solution except for everything else, close quote. I agree with the first half of your sentence, Mr. Emmert. It is the worst possible solution, because the job of the NCAA is to keep the players broke. It is to keep the players poor. It is to keep the players from receiving compensation for their labor. A system that allows players to be paid and compensated for their labor is a system that will allow for the NCAA to atrophy, because most of their investigations, most of their pushes, most of their consequences are given out for players possibly, maybe, somehow getting compensated and getting paid. that if the NCAA wants to exist in the current structures that it has on campuses, then allow the players to be compensated and paid and spend more time investigating things like sham classes. The sham classes at UNC that you said weren't necessarily a problem. The sham classes that you said were perfectly okay because the university said it was okay and not academic fraud. But yet the university comes in and possibly gives a player an award, and then they go sell their own awards that they received. You're jumping in there really fast, telling them that nope, they have to pay those things back. That is not okay. That is not allowed. That is not acceptable. And who's to say that college campuses need to be the farm leagues for the NFL and the NBA? Who's to say that the college campuses need to be the farm leagues and be this system of unpaid labor that's going to funnel into professional sports? It's had a damaging and deleterious effect not only on the athletes who aren't getting paid and the damage that their bodies are facing, but it's also faced a damaging and deleterious effect on the institutions of these universities, of who's let into the colleges. That the standards for people being let into these colleges has lowered academically and lowered the prestige of certain universities, letting people in who necessarily shouldn't be allowed in college, and that's okay. I understand college is not for everybody, and that's a socially acceptable thing to be saying. College is not for everybody. And trying to say that it is a problem. But sending people just in to play the sport of basketball or play the sport of football when they shouldn't really be in the university and can't hit the academic rigor because they're functionally illiterate or they don't read books or that they're producing work that's massively behind grade level of where there should be. That's having a damaging effect on the university and the institutions and the ability of these classes to ensure a level of rigor, to ensure a level of positive reputation. I recently got finished reading Champion's Way about the Florida State scandals and some of those classes that they had there with athletes and basically not producing high-quality work or plagiarizing work and the benefits that were alleged that they received to continue to be eligible to be put on the field. We've obviously had the scandal at the University of North Carolina coming forward. That we've got all of these scandals coming forward. The NCAA should be atrophied into an organization that no longer has a need to exist. Do we even need to have these farm leagues connected to universities? And if we are going to have these farm leagues connected to universities, then pay the athletes for their labor and end the NCAA being focused on keeping the players broke while the athletes are the ones who are going to make tons and tons of money. Because case in point, the athletes are the ones who are paying the price. And we can look at the case of Braxton Beverly as just the latest example. The NC State guard, Braxton Beverly, has appealed to play for the 2017 season, and that appeal was denied by the NCAA. He was part of the Ohio State Buckeyes basketball team when their original head coach, Thad Matta, was removed out of his job. He asked for his release as part of their freshman recruiting class to go to a new school because he didn't necessarily want to play under a new coach. Beverly never played in a game for the Buckeyes, but he did enroll in summer classes, as was suggested by then-coach Thad Matta. And just because he enrolled in classes, the NCAA suspended him from playing for a year during this transfer. And this school, Ohio State, did wait a long time to get Matta out. They did wait to push him out. They had failed here. The NCAA has failed here because they're going to keep him from playing for a year while coaches can freely travel and freely move from franchise to franchise to franchise to franchise without having any possible penalties. But a player moves without even playing a game or going to a class, and they're going to hold him out for a year. And this whole idea about academic integrity falls apart when the NCAA's justification for UNC not getting punished was that anybody could take the sham paper classes, and UNC gets to decide what academic fraud is, not them. Well, Braxton Beverly did issue a public statement saying, quote, "Through all of this, I'm still happy with the decision to come to NC State. I think it was the best move for me to set up for me to be the most successful man I can be." But apparently the NCAA was more interested in actually enforcing its own antiquated rule structure. This is a system that's set up to cause problems. This guy never played a game. He never attended class and transferred, and the NCAA is holding him out for a year because you've got to respect the rules. Oh, sure, you have massive institutional rot within your university that's causing a huge number of people to take sham classes to remain eligible for sports and get their degrees. Well, as long as that school says it's not academic fraud, then we're going to believe that it's not academic fraud. Say what, NCAA? Meanwhile, Alabama freshman Colin Sexton has not yet been deemed academically eligible. He was recruited by Kobe Baker, who ended up quitting in late September after being identified in the FBI's criminal complaint into illegal recruiting by college basketball programs. He's alleged to have accepted $15,000 to get players into the Alabama basketball program and is accused of setting up meetings with other people who were indicted, and as well as the father of an incoming Alabama freshman player. Oh no. Oh no, sound the alarms. I'm glad I'm sitting down. I unfortunately don't have any pearls to clutch here. I'm not going to get the vapors. Whatever, things we want to start talking about of how shocked we're all supposed to be. An athlete's family may have gotten paid. Oh, the horror. Oh, the humanity. An athlete's family may have gotten paid. And in the NCAA's supposed worst case scenario, that's the athlete getting paid. And in the best case, Sexton got absolutely nothing, but he's being punished for the actions of adults. That's your NCAA, ladies and gentlemen. That's your NCAA. But remember, when it comes to sexual assault scandals, wholesale institutional rot at universities, sham paper classes, the NCAA says, well, as long as the school says it isn't a problem, then we're not gonna punish them because we're here to keep players broke. They've also said that in 2009, the Alabama football team is being investigated because Sports Illustrated did a quote-unquote investigative report showing that players on the team took between $200 and $400 for autographs. Oh no! $200 to $400 in autographs. They're making money off of their status and their labor when the school was making money off of them by putting corporate logos and corporate advertisements all over the place and selling their jerseys and selling all sorts of gear. That the school was making tons of money off of them, but oh man, we have to be concerned that these players might got a handful of bills for getting involved in this. The players are no longer at the school, and we're not going to collectively forget that Alabama won the championship, and we spend more time doing investigative reports of players getting small peanuts levels compensation than we are focused on this highly exploitative system. Focus on the right things, smash the right things. That needs to be the major focus of this. You're listening to Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world of sports, left sports media, a weekly news hour highlighting the intersections of sports, politics, and radical activism. We've just been discussing how the NCAA needs to be abolished and post-haste very quickly, done yesterday. Coming up, we'll be getting into our foray of other sports news involving FIFA, tennis, and rugby. And we're going to get right into that with some other sports news. In other sports news, the nation of Saudi Arabia has announced that women will be allowed into more stadiums for sporting events in early 2018. So some positive developments happening there. Meanwhile, in UFC, Conor McGregor was caught on tape using anti-gay slurs during an event where he was supporting his training partner for a fight. Conor McGregor has a very real history of being a heel. Conor McGregor has a very real history of being a troll and saying possibly anything that is going to get his opponent mad, possibly going to get people mad where they want to tune in and watch him get beaten up. And we've seen this happen in a number of different instances with overt racism, with overt sexism, in this case with using homophobic language in this instance. And McGregor has said it's okay and that it didn't matter because he did not yell it at gay men with a public display of affection. He also said that in uttering the statement, he, quote, meant no disrespect. Yes, he did. Don't tell me you meant no disrespect when it's very abundantly clear you meant disrespect. That's why you said it. You knew it was going to be a hurtful thing to say, which is why you said it. You knew it was going to be a thing someone would get mad at, which is why you said it. And this is ultimately a case of mixed consciousness here. Using this kind of language, using these kinds of statements, while he was a campaigner for LGBT rights in Ireland during the marriage equality vote, that he was simultaneously pushing for legal rights of gay people to have equal civil rights in Ireland, at the same time using homophobic speech. That it's a level of mixed consciousness. And it's gaslighting to say that he meant no disrespect and that this was a problem. That this is a level of mixed consciousness. And it's really easy to come on and say that Conor McGregor is just absolutely wrong and we throw the baby out with the bathwater. But it's mixed consciousness here. It's mixed consciousness, and that's something that we need to address and continue to work on and push this out there. Meanwhile, in FIFA, its own advisory board on human rights is recommending that, quote, FIFA actively explores ways to use its leverage to engage with the host government about the impact of the kafala system on migrant workers involved in World Cup construction, close quote, involving the 2022 World Cup. And so its own advisory board on human rights is telling FIFA that it needs to do something about the human rights situation in the country and that it can leverage its power to do something in the country. The report also suggested investigating incidents in Russia in advance of the 2018 World Cup and suggesting sanctions for the country and businesses if these things aren't being fixed and investigated and dealt with. In high school sports, Lansing Catholic had 4 players take knees, and their principal, take note, lots of other schools, has started a new group to, quote, create a safe space for students to talk about issues of race and ethnicity and to build bridges of unity and respect. Racism is real. It affects all of us, but in different ways, and how do we respond to it? Ignore it, fight it, change it? The players, Matthew Abdullah, Michael Lynn III, Kabosh Richards, and Roger Williams, also sent a 3-page letter of suggestions to the school on ways that they could work to combat racism. And in rugby news, Athlete Ally and collegiate rugby player Gene Kim are leading an effort to get World Rugby to change its outdated anti-trans rules. Rules for play in rugby include having to have sex reassignment surgery to be able to join the team of their identified gender. And that's problematic on a number of issues. Most doctors won't do the surgery until a person is 18 years old. And then after, they have to sit out for 2 years. That's most of a person's collegiate career. And 2, what's between their legs has no impact on the hormones or the ability to play in the field. What's between their legs has no impact on that. Letting them play with their team, letting them play as a player on the team is the important thing. That's what needs to be played here. That this is an important idea. Change the antiquated rules. Get rid of the ridiculous sex reassignment surgery stuff and then the 2-year sitting out period, because it needs to go away. That needs to be smashed. It needs to be taken. down, and we need to allow for trans people to be able to play collegiate sport in the sport that they desire without ridiculous, antiquated Byzantine rules coming forward and trying to stop them. And big props to the National Rugby Players Association in the National Rugby League, because they have a new 5-year collective bargaining agreement where they are going to see a 52% pay increase. That they are going to have a pay increase of 52% over the 5-year collective bargaining agreement that they have taken action on and came forward and pushed forward to get a massive deal to get a huge pay benefit. And so big props to them. Next week on the show, we are going to be airing an interview with James Montague, an author in a number of sports books, and the book that we're going to be talking about with him is The Billionaires Club, The Unstoppable Rise of Football Super Rich Owners. Longtime listeners of this show may remember that we have a fairly recurring segment called Better Know an Owner, where we start talking about different owners involved in the various sports leagues around the country and around the world, and look at the way that they've behaved politically, the ways that they're using their profits, and how they're interacting with their home communities. And this book has been an absolute treasure trove of information for future segments. And so we were very lucky to score some time with him recently while he's in Serbia to talk about his recent book, The Billionaires Club, talking about soccer's super rich owners and the varied interests of these owners and the way that they are utilizing these clubs to get various interests met and their varied interests as to why they're making these kinds of massive investments, as well as what we as fans can do to start pushing back against this new normal of super rich owners. Well, you've been listening to Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world of sports, Left Sports Media, a weekly news hour highlighting the intersections overlapping the world of sports, activism, and radical politics. We are available for broadcast by Pacifica Radio member network stations, college stations, and community radio stations, as well as low-power FM stations, and many more stations are continuing to use our broadcast, and so we are very appreciative. If you can't listen live, or you happen to miss any of today's broadcast where you're listening, we are also available via audio podcast on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and the Google Play Store. Audio streams of our podcast are available also at our site, NAS Radical Sports, and we will soon be integrating the video editions thanks to our friends at Urbana Public Television, which can be found on YouTube at tinyurl.com/NAS Radio Video, and will also soon be found on our site, nasradicalsports.com. To contact the show with your feedback, your ideas for upcoming segments, potential interview topics, let us know at Not Another Sports Show on Facebook, nasradicalsports.com, and our contact page. Use the NAS Radio hashtag on social media, or at NAS Radio Sports on Twitter and Instagram. We have a very big, exciting interview with James Montague, the author of The Billionaires Club, The Unstoppable Rise of Football Super Rich Owners, coming forward for you next week, talking about the varied interests involved with new mass billionaires getting involved in owning sports teams and owning soccer teams, and how this has become the new normal of setting up a new agenda, and how we as sports fans, we as progressives, we as leftists, we as radicals can start pushing back against that. And so that'll be coming next week. For all of us here at the broadcast, this has been Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world of sports, Left Sports Media, and we will be back with you next week to talk about the world of sports, politics, radical activism, and a number of sports owners as we talk with James Montague about his book, The Billionaires Club, The Unstoppable Rise of Football's Super Rich Owners. See you again next week.